When the Pokemon franchise made a push into the 3D space for the first official time, Pokemon X and Y introduced a new typing to the game, Fairy type. This would mark the first instance the series has had a new typing in 13 years across 4 generations, with the last time being Generation 2 introducing Steel and Dark type. The Pokemon community at the time was both excited yet mildly concerned at the thought of a brand new type being added to the game, but all in all, I think the inclusion of Fairy made things a lot more enriching for Pokemon thereafter, considering it provided a measurable buff to older Pokemon like Clefable, Gardevoir, Togekiss, and Azumarill, along with the type itself being a veritable counter against the all-powerful Dragon type at the time. Introducing new things to the game can be small in nature but have a knock-on effect across all of its systems that were established before that point. Adding a new weapon type, new class, what have you has always been viewed as a major turning point for any game. Genshin Impact has its own empirical data to lend credence to it, the inclusion of Dendro, serving to not only introduce a new set of characters for us to collect, but also retroactively buffing a number of characters by nature, no pun intended, of the new elemental reactions that accompanied it. Suffice to say, much of version 3's hype was the result of us getting a new element. Without it, I don't think Sumeru would have been as exciting as it was, which brings me to our topic for today. Over the past couple months, I made videos talking about things that can be done to recover the player base's declining goodwill towards the game, from revitalizing potentially forgotten areas like Mondstadt to introducing new upgraded forms to characters like Ningguang and Kaya to improving and expanding on the game's overall experience in all aspects. 2 areas that I think might be helpful to that are 1. A drastic overhaul of the artifact system, which I plan to talk about in a separate video, and 2. Positing the idea of maybe introducing another element. Does Genshin Impact need more elements, or can adding more elements be beneficial for the game? We'll discuss that for today. One of the main ways gacha games, or any game regardless of genre, maintains excitement and keeps things fresh is by implementing new universal systems over time. The most popular games of all time do this in some shape or form. Minecraft adds a new material type, new biomes, overhauls the systems and whatnot, creating a far more extensive and expanded game now than what we had back in 2011, for better or worse. It's honestly less of a decision and more of an obligation. Games have to expand and add new things. Everything has to expand and add new things. If you don't constantly innovate, you'll eventually lose customers to products that do innovate. Some games have a tendency to be too cavalier with how they expand and innovate, leading to power and feature creep, which is something that Genshin has been adamantly against over the years. But it's become clear that their refusal to evolve past the mechanics already present in the game is what makes the essential experience feel so formulaic and uneventful, despite them releasing new characters, new regions, and hosting new events over time. Expanding on new systems is a major way to overhaul the game and make players have to reevaluate what they know about it. Done correctly, it can broaden the scope of the game in a way that's constructive and engaging. When Genshin brought Dendro into play, it was a shiny new gimmick that created tons of discussion over how strong it could be in the metagame, what characters got buffed from it, and what types of characters we have. Dendro reactions were so powerful at a base level it gave rise to a number of free-to-play friendly teams. A Hyper Bloom team of 4-star units was able to overpower most version 1 DPS characters at the time. And I would say version 3 was around the time team building went into high gear, building off version 2's foundation. It was great for equalizing the metagame at the time as well. Nowadays, with the exception of Cryo, I'd argue all elements are in more or less a decent position. Part of what elevated Electro as much as it did was Dendro. If not for Dendro, many Electro units would be far less effective than they are now, although Chevreuse and Chaska do help out a bit in terms of non-Dendro Electro usage. Like I said, an instrumental part of version 3's success was, among other things, the hype surrounding a brand new element added to the game. For 2 years before that, we've been settled into the 6 playable ones: Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, Animo, Electro, and Geo, and the meta that was built around them. When Dendro came out, all attention was focused on it. It was the first time Traveler was actually decent for once, as Electro, Geo, and Animo Traveler were all disappointing in the end. Additionally, having 2 extremely powerful Dendro 5-stars, a sub-DPS and main DPS, only added to the interest. Dendro would prove to become one of the most consistently strong categories too, with Kave being the only underwhelming one. Since then, I feel like the game hasn't really changed a whole lot from a fundamental perspective. Version 4 introduced a ton of unique playstyles and pushed the needle on what a character was capable of, trying out new strategies like Mono Pyro through Linny, HP manipulation through Verena, Neuvillette, and Risley, Geo finally getting some love through Navia and Chiori, the Overload reaction getting uplifted by Chevreuse, and Demily building off the once forgotten Burning reaction. But by and large, we're still operating within the same constraints that Genshin has had since 2022. Version 5 tried to shake things up with the Night Soul system being more gameplay contingent than Arc Alignment was, but it's primarily contained to just the units that belong to Nanlan. Dendro was more all-encompassing. They tried to implement custom mechanics into characters like Chaska's Elemental Roulette, but those are character exclusive. If you don't pull the character, you don't get to experience the new stuff. Version 4 and 5 collectively saw a major boost in power scaling for Genshin. A lot of that has to do with the game reaching a point where the only way for its new characters to stand out is to simply do more than what we have before. There was no possible way Mavuika could have gone about being a main attacker differently than simply just being stronger than the other main DPS units. It's true they still have a lot more to cover as far as addressing mechanics or ability combinations that have not been seen yet, but after operating within the constraints we've had for the past almost 2 years, it begs the question if a new element or even new weapon type would be helpful for the game. We're at the second to last version of Tevat, and I believe they confirmed the game's story and whatnot will continue past the final regions Neshnaya, but players, at least in the West, are losing interest in the game at a rapid pace. I don't think we can wait until late 2026 for them to introduce a new element. By then it might already be too late. Gachas can't afford to think such long-term considering the industry itself is all about short-term instant gratification and whatnot. Cat with Blue Hat actually made a video way back on how Genshin might potentially have more elements, such as a light and dark element, or maybe something more dimensional like time and space, perhaps a void element. There have been theories on Honkai Star's quantum and imaginary elements possibly also being added to Genshin. Then we have Dane's Leaf, who appears to make use of abyssal properties to attack instead of your conventional 7. That's been practically unofficially confirmed by Hoyo at this point to be a potential new playable element. These are all theories, mind you, but the point is, something to fundamentally change the game would be necessary in not just handling the monotonous gameplay experience we've had for years, but establishing true change for the game, an inflection point that distinguishes the Genshin we knew before from the Genshin we know now. It's hard to tell exactly how that would play out though, because for the most part, elemental reactions have been conceptualized around real-life applications. For instance, water conducting electricity is what makes electrocharged behave the way that it does, or fire and ice causing a melt reaction, Animal Swirl using wind to throw around fire, electricity, water, and ice everywhere. Despite the fantasy world of Genshin, they try to make the elements adhere to a specific real-life occurrence. Naturally, it can make theorizing a possible reaction between fire and light, or nature and dark, a bit more nebulous and hard to grasp. But that can pose a new opportunity in and of itself. Instead of releasing just one element, I'd argue there might be merit to releasing multiple, further creating an entirely new elemental reaction table. The 7 elements of Genshin have already covered Earth's elements quite extensively. The only things I could potentially see them adding are new reactions for each element. After all, we still don't have a full 7x7 web. For instance, Cryo reacting with Dendro or Animo reacting with Geo. There's still room for that to go around. Instead, what they can try to accomplish with the more dimensional elements like time and space is to use it to manipulate the battlefield to indirectly facilitate other reactions. For instance, using time to put a target into a frozen state with an elemental application on them, then doing like a chain attack on it before unfreezing them to apply all of those elements at once. Alternatively, they could tap into some more fantastical interactions like combining light with cryo, using ice to reflect light for more AoE damage, perhaps combining darkness with pyro for a dark fire attack. On that front, maybe the new elements can have supplementary components to them that enhance or alter the properties of the reactions we have, adding time to a vaporize reaction or space to a quicken reaction. Maybe adding light to a swirl reaction or dark to a crystallize reaction could do stuff like make the reaction last longer, apply debuffs, deal splash damage, or something to that effect. Personally, I think a separate elemental reaction table would allow for more interactions to take place, mostly because dimensional aspects like time, space, light, and darkness are already thematically linked to each other. It might even allow for a new type of endgame content, or perhaps an overhaul to Spiral Abyss, where one side can mandate terrestrial elements, while the other side needs dimensional elements. The benefit of this is that, as mentioned before, it would create a totally brand new experience for Genshin, the likes of which have never been seen before, giving Hoyo plenty of room to release new characters, expand on new mechanics, new combat systems, and release new endgame content that can further encourage players to test out different characters. Even though version 5 units are stronger than ever, they're being skipped a lot by players because they're ultimately non-essential. But if they were to release 2 new elements at once, light and dark for example, then suddenly, even if the feature light or dark 5 stars are comparatively not as strong as Mavuika in attacking or Farina in supporting, simply for the sheer fact that they're new makes them more appealing and sought after. It's a way to stifle power creep since Hoyo can spend a year or 2 building on the elements more, therefore not making more units for the current 7 and having to gratuitously inflate their power to drive sales. They would have to make a light and dark healer, light and dark support, light and dark sub DPS, light and dark main DPS. At the rate at which Genshin makes new characters, that could keep us occupied for an entire version. More when you consider they have a habit of making units of each element for every region, like how for Dendro they went back to Inazuma for Kirara and Liyue for Yaoyou and Baidu. New systems being put in place require more strategy and team building, making things more interesting for players who focus on that side of the game. On the other hand, those who play more casually and just to mess around will appreciate the new mechanics in their own way. It's fresh and new for all types of players, not just the sweats. Ultimately, this does mean they would have to add new endgame content, which is kind of what players have been begging Hoyo to do for the past god knows how long. One other benefit to doing this, especially early, is that it lays the groundwork for when those elements eventually become relevant in the story, making it feel like less of an ass pull. What caused Nanland to feel so out of place is how everything came out of nowhere. If they were to foreshadow more sophisticated technology being in the game ahead of time, like say electronic music being seen in Fontaine or Sumeru, then perhaps Shulonin's DJ equipment would have had more grounds to be legitimate and not just the thing they shoehorned in there. They exercised that with Dendro. The player base was aware of it being in the game from day one with the burning reaction, Dendro slimes, Baiju having a Dendro vision, and so on. So when it was brought into the game, it made perfect sense for there to be Dendro characters outside of Sumeru. We just haven't met them yet. Adding new elements now could make them feel like they were more involved in the game compared to if they were completely absent for the entire time. Let's put this another way. If Hoyo plans to eventually go past Devat and bring us new playable elements, there is no possible way those new elements can be retroactively implemented in previous regions without it feeling like a complete retcon. Whatever element Dainsleif is, they obviously plan to keep it only for characters associated with Kanria, but if they were to create, say, a light element character first seen in Celestia, they can't release a light character that came from Mostan or Fontaine since the lore forbids it. So if they want to make it so light or dark element characters walk around Tevat, maybe introducing them ahead of time as a precursor would help them feel more integrated. All that said, there's an obvious downside to adding new elements, namely in that you can interpret having to pull for new characters in a good or bad way depending on who you ask. Optimistically, you might see it as an opportunity to play into something fresh, whereas cynically, you might see it as Hoyo trying to force you to pull for new characters out of necessity, with there being no alternative options available. Their sister title Starrel is particularly guilty of this. HSR has a bad habit of releasing characters conveniently geared towards a certain scenario, and if you miss that character, you're out of luck for that content. With that game in particular being predicated on playstyle compositions, certain characters might feel extremely underwhelming unless you also happen to have these other characters. So obviously, Hoyo would have to navigate brand new elements in a more delicate fashion, chiefly if they plan to go the route of an entirely separate reaction table. If they were to integrate the hypothetical 8th, 9th, 10th element into the game more holistically, then you need only worry about getting just 1 or 2 characters as opposed to half a dozen to complete a party of a different reaction. But all the more reason why I feel like it's worthwhile for them to contemplate doing stuff like this sooner rather than later. Skirk is expected to come out soon, but something tells me she's gonna be one of the 7 elements. I certainly hope not. I hope she's something new given she comes from an entirely different world, but considering Hoyo hasn't done anything to foreshadow there being other playable elements, the odds of her being anything new are extremely low. I don't really think there's any significant negative besides that. You can argue feature creep, but right now the issue with Genshin is how featureless every update feels. Once again, exploration fans are the exception. They've been getting new feature after new feature, but combat and progression fans like myself who have been begging for more in-game content or more things to work towards haven't really gotten anything new for years now, so I might just be biased on that front. I'm almost certain Hoyo plans to add new elements to Genshin, especially if we ever do leave Tevat for new worlds, but my concern is that long before they get to that, the game's popularity will die out to a point where it's like No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk or other games that get it together, but people gave up on them ages ago. Adding new elements and devising new systems can be a step to showing the public that Genshin's about to change in a big way. Not just smoke and mirrors, but fundamental, foundational change. What do you guys think about new elements? Do you believe the game can get by on the 7 we have now, or do you agree that new stuff could be just what we need to turn things around? Let me know in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Genshin discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.